Sammy helped me shut out the rest of the family and bosses and underbosses of the other families. I think we totaled over 38 convictions. He arguably led to the demise of organized crime in New York.
When the former Gambino underboss decided to reveal the truth about legendary Michael Franzese, everyone was left in shock. The question, what was he really like while in the Mafia? With his answer, Sammy Gravano just tore down one of the most carefully protected stories in mob history. For decades, Michael built a clean image as the good mobster, the man who walked away from the life without betraying anyone.
Sammy the Bull was a street thug who grew up in Bensonhurst. He gravitated towards the world of organized crime as a young boy.
But according to Sammy, that image hides something much darker. In a single interview, he hinted that his escape wasn't luck, faith, or redemption. It was something else no one ever dared to mention. Until now. So, was Michael Franzese ever really clean? Let's find out. Behind the facade. Michael Franzese managed to do something almost no one in organized crime ever pulled off. He became a legend without being feared or hated. Back in the day, he was the businessman, the one who supposedly used his brains instead of bullets. And when he left the life behind, he did it without pushing anyone under the bus. To the public, that image became his armor. People saw him as the mobster who made millions without the bloodshed. The man who turned the Mafia into a corporate boardroom and left it all behind without a bloody trail. Michael himself leaned into that narrative. In interviews and appearances after leaving the life, he described himself as someone who never hurt anyone and walked away clean. "I never sent anyone to jail," he often said. He claimed he wanted to prove that a man could be part of that world and still keep his morals intact. For a long time, it worked. Fans bought into the idea that he had been smarter than everyone else, that he outplayed both the government and the Mafia. During his rise, Michael became one of the highest-earning members of the Colombo crime family, often referred to as a capo regime, a captain who ran lucrative rackets under the family's umbrella. His empire centered around a multi-million-dollar gasoline tax scam during the late 1970s and early 1980s. According to law enforcement reports, the operation defrauded the government of hundreds of millions by exploiting loopholes in fuel taxation. Michael's crew would buy fuel from wholesalers, sell it to retailers, and then disappear before the tax bill came due. The profits were staggering. At one point, Michael was reportedly earning up to $8 million a week. That kind of money made him a target, both from within and outside the organization. Yet, unlike other mob figures of his era, Michael avoided the typical signs of the life. No flashy violence, no public hits. He lived well, but he kept the chaos contained. That restraint became part of his legend. Still, insiders whispered that the truth wasn't as clean as Michael made it sound. Some said his gas tax fortune wasn't just built on clever accounting, but also on protection. The kind that came from men who enforced his business with fists and guns. Former associates claimed that in New York, no one moved that kind of money without paying tribute to those capable of violence. Even as the FBI built cases around the gas tax scheme, Michael maintained his composure. When he eventually pleaded guilty to racketeering charges in 1986, he served about 8 years before being released in 1994. By then, many expected him to vanish, like most who walked away from that world. But he didn't. He reinvented himself. After his release, Michael built a second career as a motivational speaker and author. He toured churches, schools, and conferences across the country, sharing stories about redemption and faith. He wrote several books and appeared in documentaries, telling people how he found God and left the life behind. To his audiences, he became the ultimate symbol of transformation, the mobster who got out without ratting. But that's where the tension began, because Sammy Gravano didn't believe it. Sammy's name carried a very different kind of weight. Known as the Bull, he made his reputation through violence. He was John Gotti's underboss in the Gambino family, one of the most powerful mafia organizations in America. Sammy admitted to participating in or ordering 19 murders, and his reputation was that of a man who would do whatever it took to maintain order and loyalty. When the government finally caught up with Gotti and him in the early 1990s, Sammy made the decision that changed everything. He flipped. His testimony helped convict Gotti, ending the reign of the so-called Teflon Don. To law enforcement, Sammy was the ultimate witness. To the underworld, he was the ultimate traitor. Yet, Sammy owned it. He never denied what he did. He told his story in detail, the hits, the betrayals, the power games, on his podcast and in interviews. He said he cooperated because Gotti had already betrayed him, and that survival meant doing what was necessary. What bothered Sammy was hypocrisy. So when Michael built a brand around the idea that he never cooperated, Sammy took that personally. In his view, anyone who walked free after federal charges must have given something in return. During one of his podcasts, Sammy made some hints. According to insiders who've known both men, this tension ran deep. "There's respect there, but not trust," one person said. "They know they're from the same world, but they live by different codes now." Behind closed doors, that mix of mutual recognition and quiet resentment lingered for years. Sammy reportedly said that Michael acts like he's above the rest, like he found a loophole in the life. And maybe that's why their feud hit such a nerve, because it forced people to ask a question the Mafia never liked to answer. Can anyone truly leave clean? And as the back and forth grew louder, one thing became clear. Sammy wasn't done talking. There was something he knew, something he had kept to himself for years, and now he was ready to reveal it. The storm before the fall. Before the cameras, the interviews, and the podcasts where Sammy Gravano revealed what Michael Franzese was really like while in the Mafia, there was a world built on silence. A world where respect was earned in blood or in dollars, and where breaking that silence could mean the end. Inside that world rose two men who couldn't have been more different, yet somehow were destined to clash. Michael Franzese and Sammy Gravano. Michael grew up in a world where the rules were written by men who ran New York from the shadows. His father, John "Sonny" Franzese, was a feared underboss in the Colombo crime family. From an early age, Michael saw the way power worked, in social clubs, in envelopes of cash, and in whispered deals behind closed doors. After his father was sent to prison, Michael stepped into the life almost naturally. Insiders later said he had a sharp mind for business and a rare sense of discipline for someone raised in chaos. While most young soldiers earned their keep through hijackings and gambling, Michael saw a bigger opportunity, an opportunity that would bring in millions without a single bullet fired. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, he had perfected what became known as the gas tax scheme. The plan was deceptively simple: buy gasoline in bulk, sell it to gas stations across the East Coast, and avoid paying the federal and state taxes that were owed on each gallon. The unpaid tax money turned into profit, an ocean of it. According to investigators, the operation was raking in as much as $8 million a week at its height. Michael's network stretched from New York to Florida, with shell companies set up to keep the money flowing and the authorities confused. Even federal prosecutors admitted that the scale of the operation was something they had never seen before. He became known as the Yuppie Don, wearing sharp suits, driving luxury cars, and living a life that looked more like Wall Street than the Mafia's old Brooklyn roots. But in the shadows of another family, a very different kind of power was rising. Sammy Gravano, known on the streets as the Bull, had climbed the ranks of the Gambino crime family with a reputation built on violence and loyalty. His rise came through blood, not business. He was known as the man who got things done when others hesitated. By the time he became underboss, his name carried weight that few dared to challenge. In 1985, the mob world shifted when Paul Castellano, boss of the Gambino family, was gunned down outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. According to multiple reports and court testimonies, Sammy was deeply involved in planning that hit, a move that cleared the path for John Gotti to take control. From that moment, Sammy became a national name. To law enforcement, he was the man behind the bloodiest takeover in modern mob history. To his peers, he was proof that power could be taken, not just inherited. While Michael was counting millions, Sammy was enforcing rules with violence. One controlled fuel depots and accountants. The other commanded killers and crews. They lived in the same city, operated in the same era, yet their paths never quite crossed. Not yet. Each man represented a different side of the same coin, one with brains, one with brutality. Still, both shared one truth. Power always came at a cost. Federal agents were closing in on every family, planting bugs in clubhouses, flipping informants, and using racketeering laws to bring down entire organizations. By the late 1980s, indictments were spreading like wildfire, and the old structure of the Mafia was collapsing from the inside. Michael's empire began to crumble when investigators finally cracked his gas tax scheme. He was arrested, convicted, and sent to prison. Sammy's world fell apart a few years later when wiretaps caught conversations that tied his boss, Gotti, to multiple homicides, including some Sammy had carried out himself. Both men faced the same system they had tried to outrun, and both would make choices that changed their lives forever. For years, the two moved in separate lanes, occasionally mentioning one another but never directly engaging. Still, people whispered about what might happen if they ever came face to face, and when that moment finally came, it didn't disappoint. What began as a simple conversation turned into a clash of truth, ego, and memory, and what was said that day would upend everything: the confession. Sammy Gravano had always believed that once you were in for life, or dead trying. So when this former mobster revealed what Michael Franzese was really like in the Mafia, listeners took notice. He had walked away, alive, and seemingly unscathed. And the question that haunted countless people was simple: how? Now, it's time to tell everything. In an interview, Sammy explained it plainly. "I always thought that once you're in the mob, you can never leave alive," he said. So how were Michael Franzese and John Gotti Jr. allowed to leave and stay alive? Well, both of them cooperated. Sammy knew Michael personally. They had met once, a possible sit-down where words were measured and gestures weighed. "We talked. Seems like a nice guy. I liked him," he recalled. "I never knew him back then. He says he knew me. He never knew me. Not that I know of." And he said, "Well, I never put anybody in jail. What does that mean to me?" I told him, "What do I care what you did? You sat with the government and cooperated." The implication was staggering. Michael's claim that he never put someone in prison might have sounded noble, but in Sammy's eyes, that wasn't the point. Michael's confessions might not have directly caused any other mobster to go down, but he still confessed something, and that's all that mattered to Sammy. He said, "I wish I never took the stand or had to take the stand. Good. But you did cooperate. And that's why you left the life," he repeated. "Not because you'd found God, because you'd been offered a sweet deal." To Sammy, that wasn't a problem itself. After all, he'd done the same. But at least he'd had the courage to admit it and face the consequences. The Mafia's code is absolute. Silence above all. Taking even a single word to the authorities can mark a lifetime of mistrust. And that's what Sammy's life looked like after he made his own deal. Mistrust and disrespect all around. So hearing Michael boast that he'd left the life without making enemies was salt for his wounds. And he would not let that pain go to waste. Sammy's words reframed Michael's story. For years, Michael had presented his exit as a mix of faith, family, and personal choice. But according to Sammy, survival wasn't just a matter of luck or newfound morality, it was transactional. Cooperation, quiet as it might have been, bought him safety. Not because you found Jesus, not because you found a girlfriend who's a Christian and that made you believe, Sammy said, making it clear that these personal transformations, while true, were not the real reason for his survival. The deal, unspoken but understood, had saved Michael. There were a lot of other reasons, Sammy added. I don't want to talk behind somebody's back. But John Jr. did the exact same thing. This revelation altered the way Michael was perceived. For decades, he was the low-profile earner who avoided the violence, the man who amassed millions yet remained untouched. Sammy's assessment introduced a new angle. He wasn't untouchable because of morality or caution alone. Cooperation, even if discreet, was the unseen currency that allowed him to exit the life alive. The interview carried a tension that didn't need embellishment. Sammy didn't raise his voice, and in the end, his words left viewers with more questions than answers. How much had Michael truly given up behind closed doors? What else had been negotiated to guarantee safety? And if John Gotti Jr. had followed the same path, how many other untold deals had shaped the modern understanding of the Mafia? Table in the back. The final chapter in the long, tangled story of Sammy Gravano and Michael Franzese didn't unfold in a courtroom or on the streets of New York, but across a quiet table in a small Italian restaurant in Scottsdale. Cameras rolled as the two men, once at the height of power in rival families, sat face to face for Table in the Back. To most viewers, it was just an interview. To insiders, it was something else entirely. A clash between two men who had survived a world that rarely lets anyone leave alive. From the moment the discussion began, there was a sense of measured calm. Both spoke with the kind of restraint only men who've lived through high stakes can master. Yet, according to those present, beneath the polite tone was tension, an invisible line drawn between mutual respect and unresolved skepticism. Sammy had publicly questioned how Michael managed to walk away from the Mafia untouched, suggesting cooperation made that possible. Now they were seated just a few feet apart, each carrying his own version of the truth. The conversation started lightly. They talked about the old days, the structure of the Mafia, and what it really took to earn power. Michael shared stories of his gasoline tax scheme, how he made millions while avoiding unnecessary violence. Sammy nodded, occasionally smiling, but his focus was sharp. He knew what he wanted to say, and everyone could feel it coming. When the discussion shifted to loyalty and leaving the life, Gravano finally drew the line. He reminded the audience that in the Mafia, no one leaves clean. He said that once you're in, the only true exits are prison or death. Then, without raising his voice, he said, "I always thought you could never leave alive, but some did. Michael did. John Gotti Jr. did, and both of them cooperated." Michael didn't interrupt. He kept his composure, letting Sammy finish. Then he repeated what he said many times before. He never testified against anyone, and no one went to prison because of him. It was his standard defense, calm, logical, and firm. But Sammy pressed further, not with anger, but with certainty. "You sat with the government," he said. "Maybe you didn't take the stand, but you cooperated. That's why you left the life. Not because of faith, not because of love, because you made a deal." That statement echoed through the room. For viewers familiar with Mafia rules, those words carried a heavy meaning. Sitting with the government, even for a deal that doesn't result in anyone going to prison, still breaks the code of omerta, the code of silence. To Sammy, that made all the difference. But he wasn't calling Michael a liar. He was calling him pragmatic. In Sammy's world, that was an entirely different kind of sin. According to insiders close to both men, the tension was all about credibility. Michael represented the reformed image of the mobster, a man who could tell his story on podcasts and television without shame. Sammy, on the other hand, carried the weight of a man who had admitted his own betrayal and paid the price. Seeing Michael celebrated publicly for his clean exit reportedly struck a nerve. Still, neither man lost his composure. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic walkouts, just two men with vastly different philosophies about loyalty and survival. The contrast between them spoke louder than any argument could. Sammy was the realist, insisting that in the underworld, survival always costs something. Michael was the strategist, holding firm that his choices were his own, guided by conviction, not compromise. The Table in the Back interview didn't settle who was right. It didn't need to. What it did was strip away the myth that surrounded both men. Viewers saw the Mafia through the eyes of two survivors, one who accepted the stain of cooperation and one who denied it ever happened. Their conversation revealed that loyalty, in the end, is not black and white. It's a spectrum shaped by power, fear, and opportunity. For those who followed their stories for decades, the takeaway was simple but powerful. There are no clean exits in organized crime, only negotiated ones. The weight of truth. When the table in the back cameras stopped rolling, the silence in the room spoke louder than anything captured on tape. Both men had said what they came to say. There was no handshake that erased the past, no dramatic apology or revelation, just awareness that the life they'd both survived still defined them, even decades after they left it. According to insiders who were present that day, the tension didn't end when the recording did. Sammy Gravano was polite but distant, satisfied that he had spoken his truth. Michael Franzese was calm and professional, but there was a flicker of frustration beneath his composure. Each man believed his version of events, and neither was willing to bend. For viewers, it was a moment of contrast. Sammy had long accepted the label of a man who cooperated with the government. He never hid from it. He said he did what he had to do, and that he paid the price in full. Michael, on the other hand, built his public story around transformation. Their meeting forced audiences to reconsider both paths. What made this moment so gripping was that neither man was lying. They were just telling different versions of survival. Sammy's world was ruled by hard lines. You're in or you're out. Loyal or disloyal. Silent or talking. Michael's world evolved into shades of gray. The idea that you could leave the life, rebuild yourself, and still keep your honor. Their conversation didn't settle that debate, but it exposed the space between myth and reality that few ever get to witness. To the audience, it felt like the closing of a circle. Two men who had once lived and breathed the same violent world, now sitting across from each other, years removed from the chaos that defined them. The conversation wasn't about who was tougher or who had made more money. It was about survival, legacy, and the versions of truth they chose to carry. Both men had aged, not just in years, but in perspective. The energy that once fueled street wars and betrayals had turned into reflection, though the weight of their pasts never left the room. Their meeting won't change how history remembers them. It didn't erase the past, and it didn't rewrite it. But it reminded everyone watching that behind every confession, every podcast, and every story told on camera, there are still shadows that don't fade. Was Sammy right that no one leaves the Mafia without giving something up? Or was Michael truly one of the few who managed to escape untouched? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.